Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts, a Ukraine War Update Extra video giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. This episode is brought to you by Country of Peace. The t-shirt I'm wearing is a Country of Peace t-shirt. They are a charity set up by Valeria and husband, but Valeria is Ukrainian. I interviewed her possibly on my A Tippling Philosopher channel now, actually. I think it's when I could only do live streams through that channel. So if you want to go and find it, go to my ATP, base channel. Although this is much bigger than that channel now. And yeah, check them out. They do really great work. She does really great work, and awesome stuff. Okay, now to start this episode, I'm only going to deal with a few subjects in this episode. I'm going to go to Armenia and Azerbaijan just to get a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on. I'm still no great expert on this particular part of the world and the politics involved here and the history involved here. If you remember, I told you that Armenia was a Christian nation. Azerbaijan is a Muslim nation. There's obviously going to be that difference. In fact, someone on the channel was saying it is the original Christian nation, the first one. So there's a cultural difference between these two nations. Armenia has been traditionally supported slightly more by Russia, although both of them were part of the USSR. But since the dissolution of the USSR and the wars between these two, Russia has played a bit of a peacekeeper role, but I think siding more with Armenia. Well, with Armenia turning their back on Russia, and likewise Russia turning its back on Armenia for maybe seeking help, assistance from the US, for example. There's been this precarious situation that maybe, I don't know enough, but maybe it's that Azerbaijan have become opportunistic. There's an area of Azerbaijan that is called Nagorno-Karabakh. There have been two wars over this. Armenia took control over Nagorno-Karabakh and some surrounding regions, and they kind of controlled that. And then in 2020, it flared up again. That was, I think, back in the late 80s and into the 90s. And then in 2020, it flared up again, and actually Azerbaijan pushed Armenia out. But there are lots of Armenians in that area. There were previously Azeris in the area who were sort of kicked out of there, like 1 million back in the 80s and 90s, I think. And then there's 120,000 maybe Armenians in this area now. And it looks like Azerbaijan is, starting to make moves on that area. But it is not, it's internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, right? So it is difficult. Political situation, right? Just going through what happened today. So Azerbaijan-Armenia hostilities now reported. An overview of events will be posted on this thread. So this is kind of a chronological understanding of what took place today. Air alarm, drone noises, gunfire heard in the Karabakh region. It's reported that cellular communication was disconnected in the region. Azerbaijani forces are conducting strikes on Stepanakert, Kankendi. So if we go and find where that is, Stepanakert is there. You can see right in the middle of the kind of area I was talking about, just there. Anyway, Azerbaijani forces conducting strikes there. The strike is reported as one on an Armenian Tor air defense complex. See, there's going to be a lot of Soviet era equipment going on here, and then a lot of Russian equipment subsequently. An Azerbaijan kamikaze drone reportedly hits an Armenian electronic warfare complex. Now, the Azerbaijanis had success apparently in the 2020 iteration of this conflict, like a 6-week, I think 44 days maybe, conflict. They used a lot of Israeli and Turkish drones, and it really was a successful exhibition of drone warfare, and the Armenians weren't able to do much about it. So anyway, back to today. Initially reported as air defense, but these are more likely launches of Azerbaijani LoRa missiles, so maybe some offensive missile launches. Right. And Russia is in contact with Azerbaijan in light of the anti-terrorist operation in Karabakh. Spokeswoman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Maria Zakharova, said. I don't know who the terrorists are in that The Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry reportedly stated that the only path to peace in the region is a complete withdrawal of the Armenian military from Karabakh. It also reported that Azerbaijan has created a humanitarian corridor to ensure evacuation of the population. Now, the issue around this is that the Armenians claim that there are no Armenian soldiers there. Well, we'll come to that in a second. So Russia calls on Armenia and Azerbaijan to stop the bloodshed and return to a diplomatic settlement, said Zakharova. Later, the Azerbaijani armed forces published footage of drone strikes on targets in the territory of Karabakh. Shell landed in Stepanakert, damaged a residential building. Armenian Foreign Ministry calls on the UN Security Council and Russian peacekeepers to take measures to stop Azerbaijan's hostilities in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And in Yerevan, that's the capital of Armenia, protesters gathered in front of the government building and demanded the Prime Minister intervene in the situation. Quote, Nikol, referring to Pashinyan, is a traitor, they shout. Now, here's a guy that's been cozying up to the US and the West. Now his own people are shouting that he's a traitor because I guess he's not helping those in Nagorno-Karabakh enough. Problem is, you go and help them out in a way that they want, then that is basically a proper full-out war, I would assume. A quote, Armenia is not involved in military operations. And I want to note again, and this is the Prime Minister Pashinyan saying this, that the Armenia does not have an army in Karabakh. At present, we will not take any rash actions, Prime Minister Pashinyan said. He added that Azerbaijan is trying to drag Armenia into the war. Meanwhile, the situation in Yerevan, in the Republic Square, is heating up. Protesters keep chanting Nikol is a traitor and are clashing with the police. So this isn't looking good. And then next reports here, Armenia is not going to launch military actions because of the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenian Prime Minister said. He emphasized the Republic has no army there. At the moment, we will not take any rash actions. Meanwhile, a spontaneous rally is gathering at the center of Yerevan, shouting Nikol is a traitor, and Artsakh, that is the name, the Armenian name for that region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Protesters blocked Tigran Metz Avenue. Armenian ambassador at large Emma Marikyan called on the US to mediate in the Karabakh situation. And, you know, this is where you don't really want the US getting dragged into the center of this conflict. Goodness me. So difficult. I don't know enough about the details going on. I know some people are very strongly for, say, for example, Azerbaijan. Other people are very strongly for Armenia. I don't know enough about it. Thomas Tyner, who's someone that we've referred to an awful lot recently, he's been vehemently actually behind the Azerbaijanis. He says two factions have formed around the Karabakh issue: compromise and make peace. That's Armenia, USA, EU, Armenia's people, and himself. No compromise ever and never peace. The Karabakh Armenian leadership, Russia, Iran, Armenian diaspora, and Hezbollah. So I think what Thomas Tyner has been so against is not Armenia, but actually the kind of breakaway area of Nagorno-Karabakh and the Armenians who are kind of ruling there. I guess the assumption that is Azerbaijani land, technically, and so these Armenians here calling for support from Armenia, and they will have lots of relatives in Yerevan, for example. They're the ones that are going to be calling the Armenian Prime Minister a traitor, but it's just a really difficult situation. I'm going to have to learn more about this to check out how it goes. I mean, Thomas Tyner here says, in September 2020, I said after 3 days that Armenia has lost the war in Karabakh. In March 2022, I said after 7 days that Russia has lost the war in Ukraine. In September 2023, I say after 20 minutes of fighting that Karabakh Armenians have lost the war. It's over, surrender now. So he's massively in support of, well, in support of the Armenians ceding that territory, I guess, and the people ruling there not putting up that fight. But again, I don't want to cast too much of my own opinion because it's not based on enough knowledge yet. So I'm going to go off that topic. I just thought, as I learn a bit more about this, I'll pass that on to you. And if I get anything wrong, please correct me. We'll try and learn about this together. And if you are an expert on this area, let me know, and you could come on and talk about it if you're someone of great knowledge of this conflict, historically speaking. Right, I'm going to go back to what I talked about earlier today, which was the kind of Trump situation. We had this video that I showed you, and I know some of you are like, I didn't want to watch that, and some of you are like pro-Trump, and actually quite a few of you who are Republicans. There's quite a few Reagan Republicans and kind of conservatives in my viewership who said, yeah, actually, I'm not a massive fan of Trump, or I may have been a fan of Trump, but he's wrong on this. And I mean, you could be a conservative and see this guy as being well out here, or you could be a fan of Trump previously and see that actually what he's saying here is just so wrong. And it was. I mean, it made me really angry this morning. Anyway, someone came back and said this, and this is all quite important at the moment because Zelensky is presently in the UN building as I speak. I think he's just about to make a speech. But he's in America, and you've got this situation where Kevin McCarthy, who's a Republican Speaker of the House, and he had that difficult process of becoming Speaker, majority Speaker, because what did it take 14 times for him to finally get the votes? He had to make concessions to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. And I think one of his concessions here is probably refusing to speak to Zelensky when he visits the Capitol later this week. So you've got a major Republican focal point, an important person, the Speaker of the House, is refusing to meet Zelensky. Now, what does that tell Republican voters? And this is what I worry about. And I know there's lots of bipartisan support, both in the Senate and outside in the real world, in the electorate. But it is a problem. And the more these views are given the oxygen of media, of media showing, the more credible these views become. I talked about the mere exposure effect previously. The more you show something like this, and you could say I'm at fault here for showing it, but actually I'm critiquing it. The more credible it becomes. But this isn't credible. It seems perfectly obvious to me that the US should be wholeheartedly behind defending and assisting Ukraine. As Republicans Against Trump here says, unlike other MAGA Republicans, McCarthy understands the importance of Ukraine, but he's too scared of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the pro-Putin wing of the party. He's Speaker in name only. And actually, I think there is something to be said about that. I think he's a pretty decent... No, I don't. I think he's... decent was the wrong word. I think he's quite a standard Republican, has been previously. But in order to maintain his position, he has had to make lots of concessions to the fringe wings. Anyway, I just want to talk you through this comment. Jonathan, a pro-Ukraine, never Trump conservative libertarian here. So, interesting position there. A retiree in Florida, since that will complete my profile as a troll. I dislike populist politicians generally and Trump specifically, but I think your reaction to his buffoonery has resulted in you making an error. I know that you don't want to hear it, but I actually do. I don't want to make errors, but if I do, I like to be called out on them. But as stating that the US cannot push Ukraine to do a deal that Ukraine doesn't want ignores a few things. Right, I think I know where he's going to go here. I haven't actually read this yet. Fully. I've read this first bit. So I didn't say that the US can't be involved in doing a deal, in getting a deal brokered between Russia and Ukraine. What annoyed me about what your man said in this interview was he said, I could do the deal. I mean, for Trump, it's all about Trump. And he's so transactional. He's like, I am doing this deal. The art of the deal. I'm doing the deal. You're going to get this. You're going to get that. Look at me. I'm the one doing this deal. And it ignores, actually, the desires and needs of the sovereign entity that is Ukraine. And it ignores the elected representatives of Ukraine stipulating what they want out of the deal. And it ignores what the people of Ukraine want out of the deal. So the US, of course, is going to be in there influencing, as there are many nations will be, and the EU and other organizations and brokers of an eventual peace deal. But it's not about doing what you and your one head thinks is the absolute right thing to do, in so doing ignoring the very people that you're making a deal for, kind of overriding the Ukrainians here. And that was the issue that I perceived from that interview. Anyway, your man here says, first, as you have made a point of stating for months, the US uses its financial and military support around the world to wield influence. Yes, the US is providing military and financial assistance to Ukraine and will surely expect to have some influence there. It's unrealistic to say the US will simply pony up support and then not expect to have some voice in the peace agreement, and that goes to the EU as well. Absolutely agree. 100%. Second, I think Ukrainian perceptions on what is acceptable is not monolithic, true, and instead the Ukrainian citizenry encompass a full spectrum of ideas and opinions. I'm sure that the distribution of views is skewed strongly to the expel the Russians altogether, but there are appeasers and peaceniks there as well. It is possible that the Ukrainian government someday does decide to negotiate a peace in which it surrenders some territory, or at least reduces its sovereignty over a territory. I.e. establishing a semi-autonomous area in the Donbass or Crimea, or agreeing to a demilitarized zone along the border with Russia. Absolutely agree with that. So I think this may be a misinterpretation of what I was saying. But if that's the case, then it's up to Ukraine to kind of make that deal, rather than to try and convince Ukraine that should be the option, which I think is what Trump is saying. I mean, it is what he's saying. So rather than going in and saying, right, well, what do you want, Ukraine? Let's try and work through what you want and what Russia wants, and come to some kind of compromise. What Trump says is, I understand what Russia wants, and that's what I'm going to railroad through to you, Ukraine. And that's the issue. So let's just see if I'm right from what he says here, from what we can work out.
A lot of people expected could happen. You could have made a deal. So they could have made a deal where there's less territory right now than Russia's already taken, to be honest. And you could have made a deal where nobody was killed. They had a deal. They would have had a Ukraine country. Now nobody even knows if Ukraine is going to be totally taken over.
And they worry that means President Putin is going to get to keep the territory he's unlawfully
I'd make a fair deal for everybody. Nope.
Doesn't mean that? Wouldn't be a win for Putin?
You know, that's something that could have been negotiated, because there were certain parts, Crimea and other parts of the country, that a lot of people expected could happen. You could have made a deal. So
expected could happen. He doesn't even know. He can't remember the name of Donbass for sure. But Crimea, Donbass, he expected. There are lots of parts of the country that expected could happen. It's just words are failing him there, but as they are for me, evidently. He is essentially saying everyone's expecting that to be. I don't know. People were. He's projecting his own expectations into this, obviously, and he's thinking, well, if you're going to do a deal, they're going to lose Crimea and Donbass, because I think he's looking at from a strongman perspective, from Putin's perspective, and seeing what Putin would want, and kind of aligning himself with that, and understanding that this is kind of transactional, and still probably thinking that Russia have got the stronger army, and not really understanding how precarious Russia's military is, their standing is, their lack of equipment, and etc., and a lack of understanding of the conflict as a whole, and then looking at it from a real simplistic point of view, from almost a pre-2022 point of view, and saying, well, we're all expecting this to be over quickly. Kind of, it's not, but yeah, Russia are going to win, so let's give them that to appease them. Well, it's just wrong all over, and it's taking that approach and taking that into a negotiation with Ukraine would then be forcing Ukraine to take that on. There might be appeasers in Ukraine. There might be people who are realistic on what the outcome might be, but you don't go in there saying that already. Like, the art of the deal, I don't think he's very good at making deals, because he's already given away Crimea and Donbass. That, like, if you were Putin and you were watching that, and then Trump comes to the table with you, Trump's in your pocket already. Trump has told you on national TV that he would give Crimea and Donbass away. So the starting point for Russia looking at that is, well, we've got Crimea and Donbass. What else can we get? Trump has already showed his hand, and he's given away much of Ukraine to Russia. So yeah, I just have a huge problem with that. Third, US and European support for Ukraine varies widely. This ranges from no support at all for Ukraine, let the Russians take whatever they want, to unleashing the Ukrainians to attack Russia wherever and whenever it likes, with whatever weapons we can give. I'm leaning more on the latter position myself. The end result is the Western support emerges as a blend of these opinions and positions. That means there's likely a substantial portion of the US and Western nations generally that would support a negotiated peace in which meaningful Ukrainian territory is surrendered. Again, I'm vehemently opposed to this, but I'm just one voter. For some Ukrainians, any deal is a deal Ukraine doesn't want, but I firmly believe the war will end in a deal someday, and for some in the West, any deal short of complete expulsion will be a disappointment. But I do believe that there are plenty of people and leaders in the West who will be willing to return to government spending on their needs and ready to cut off Ukraine ASAP, and so we'll be pushing for a deal that can be done fast instead of a deal that protects Ukraine. And there will be a sense of that, I'm sure, but my opinion would be to go into, if I had anything to do with it, my worst case scenario for Ukraine would be that Crimea was like a third party semi-autonomous region, like he was sort of mentioning. Anything that involves Crimea being Russian is not acceptable, personally. So, but when you look at Trump and he's already like, well, they can have Crimea, Russia can have Crimea, then you're like, that if you are involved in brokering that deal, Russia will get what they want, and that's what makes me angry. So it's not that there won't eventually be some kind of deal. So it's what's it called? It's the anchoring bias. So the anchoring bias in psychology, and this is like when you go and haggle. My partner gets really embarrassed with me. We were in Gambia for Christmas, like, I don't know, before the boys were born, so it must have been like 14 years ago or something. And you go along the street markets and you're doing deals and you're haggling, and it's a whole lot of haggling, and of course they come in with a nuts number, right, for a necklace or a picture or whatever. They say nuts number, and what they're doing is they're anchoring. So they're anchoring it up here, and if you go halfway, they've already won, because halfway of nuts is still pretty nuts, right? So. And then you do this haggling, and you get somewhere in the middle, and they've won. They've won. That's a transaction there. They've anchored it up here. Now, I would always say they would anchor it. So say they would say, I forget what the currency is, but say they say 100 spondoolies. I would say, I'll give you 10. And they would laugh. And then I'll give you 10. And then you walk away, and then they bring you back. And my partner's just so embarrassed. Like, well, you can't say 10. That's virtually nothing compared to what they've asked for. And it's like, yeah, he will sell it for what he will be happy to sell it for, and I can walk away and not have it. I'm not overly bothered, right? And so they go nuts, you go nuts down here, and then they come down and you stay nuts. That's what I do. So they go down to 80 here, and you say 10, and they go no, and you say 10, and you just stay at that, and you don't get embarrassed. And the end of it, you buy it for like 20 or whatever, but you've gone from 100 to 20 rather than go halfway and go up to 80, right? But the reason I'm saying all of this is because Trump says it's art of the deal, and he can't even haggle properly. So he goes in and says, well, like, I'm already anchoring it at Crimea and Donbass, and then like, where do you go from there? Russia is, I don't know, because there's 3 people here, but if Russia was the seller, like, Trump's already gone up and said, I'll buy that for 100 spondoolies. And the seller's like, all right, brilliant. I don't even need to haggle. I'll have that. There you go. It's like Monty Python and the Life of Brian. and that kind of haggling at the market there. Just, yeah, and it's the ignoring Ukraine in this whole thing. I'm going to bring in. I'm reading a book at the moment by Madeleine Albright called Fascism. I pretty much finished it. Excellent book, written in 2018 when Trump was in charge. And I just thought this part, her chapter on Trump, is really very good, very interesting. But I've written articles, I think, previously on how Trump is transactional. Everything is transactional. And so when he approaches doing international diplomacy, he sees it from a business point of view. But actually, and people loved him for that. They're like, oh, we're going to have a businessman in charge of the US. This is fantastic, because it's just one big business, one big corporation, and that's what we need. And of course, international diplomacy is not like that. And she does a really good job of explaining this. So she says here, Trump's top advisors have praised him for his clear-eyed outlook that the world is not a global community, but an arena where nations, non-governmental actors, and businesses engage and compete for advantage. This formulation puzzles me, she says, because it's fair to say the world isn't exactly Sesame Street. It is a place where people from all countries must live, and to reduce the sum of our existence to a competitive struggle for advantage among more than 200 nations is not clear-eyed, but myopic. People and nations compete. But that is not all they do. Imagine a small town in America, or a village in Africa, or a city in Asia where there is no sense of community, no sharing of responsibility, no looking out for the other guy, just a grim daily fight to win at the expense of neighbours. Whose interests would that put first? Globally, there's hardly an economic, security, technological, environmental, or health-related challenge that any country can better address alone than through a joint effort with neighbours. It is the duty of diplomats to foster that cooperation. Trump's view of life as a wilderness of Darwinian dogfights doesn't correspond to the intricately interdependent world in which we must frequently join forces if we are to make the best of our lot. Responsible governments understand this, but responsible governments aren't the ones that cause the most pain. Designated fill in the blank first, as in she's referring back to a whole thing she did on America First, as the golden rule of international relations provides an all-purpose justification for tyrants to do as they like. What is Pyongyang's rationale for building nuclear weapons if not to put North Korean interests first? By annexing Crimea, Putin placed Russian desires above international law. Why, if not for its own benefit, does Iran intervene in the affairs of its neighbours? For centuries, imperial powers perpetrated physical and economic atrocities against colonial populations to exalt their own countries and monarchs. Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia to help the fatherland compete for advantage. Underlying fascism is the theory that nations are entitled to take what they want for no other reason than that they want it. There are better golden rules. Right, and it's so damned important. And, this is what NATO helps to foster, UN, the EU, about cooperation, working together. It's not this zero-sum game. It's not this transactional approach to reality where I have to screw you over for America to do well. Or I have to screw you over for me to do well. Do you know what? If we work together, we can both do well. There is a win-win. The idea that's Darwinian as well is problematic, because if you look at evolution and the species that, when you look at humanity, that Homo sapiens, why we've done so well is precisely because we're good at cooperating and communicating, and language and opposable thumbs, and all these things that allow us to cooperate even better, to get a competitive advantage over other species or over so on and so forth. So a tribe that competes well with each other will outcompete another tribe. But as we grow bigger and bigger and bigger, we live in this global society. Actually, there's one sense we're all one big tribe, and we need to cooperate. We set ourselves into smaller and smaller sub-tribes, but at certain times we need to cooperate with other tribes or other nations against more universal threats or this and that. So, and you have these resources, we have these resources, you have this expertise, we have that expertise. We need to cooperate so that hopefully we all gain out of this. And it isn't just a case of, in the example she's using here, is America First, and it's all about isolationism, and we will win this this competitive battle, and everything is just a transaction where we seek to win out of that transaction. I've probably gone off on one, but I hope you see where I'm going, and I just think that's really important to understand that that's what he's like. And actually going in, if he was to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine would get absolutely shafted. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm sure you've heard too much of me banging on about Mr. T. No, the other one. I've already told you, this episode is sponsored by Country of Peace. It's also sponsored by my book, The Family Book of Word of the Day, for a year, every year, forever. If you like words, check this out. Buy it as a Christmas present for some unsuspecting family member. Bring wordsmithery on them as a form of, I don't know, festive torture. No. Hopefully this book might be of use and to the delectation, as a word, for someone in the viewership. Whatever. Thanks. Speak soon.